Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Please let me know if you can't see it. The recording has started, so we will be recording the session for anyone who wasn't able to attend live. I've put a link just for some practice papers, especially the one that I've taken a lot of the example questions we'll be going through today inside of the deck. If you want to follow along on your own screen and get that up, I can post the link into the chat. However, for most of the questions we'll work through together in the session, I've taken screenshots, so you won't need to do that. That's more for you to access in your own time and to maybe practice some other past papers or some of the questions that we don't cover after the session once you've been introduced to how to actually undertake the different styles of questions that you might be facing inside of the reading section for the ELLT. Just to give you a brief rundown of what we'll be going over today, obviously we'll just get going with a little introduction to me, and if any of you would like to introduce yourselves, you're more than welcome to come off of mute and introduce yourself to everyone in the session. We'll also just recap how the ELLT exam is marked, just for those of you that aren't aware, any of you who didn't join the session previously. Then we'll actually move into the bulk of the session itself, so looking at key points to bear in mind when approaching the reading section, before actually looking at the types of different questions you will be expected to answer. With each of these, we'll go over either one or two examples together. Hopefully it will be quite interactive and you guys can put the answers that you think inside of the chat, and we can discuss what the answers are and how to arrive at them together. If we have time, we can have a look at some other past papers. I'll put a link in the chat anyway in case we don't get time to do that, so that you know where to look for past papers in your own time so you can practice. And I'll try to save around 15 to 20 minutes just at the end in case any of you have any questions that I haven't asked about, or there's anything else you'd like a little bit more detail on or advice on before the session finishes. Of course, I would encourage you to ask questions throughout. So if there's something that isn't clear or that you have a question on whilst it's on the screen or whilst I'm discussing it, please do come off of mute if you're feeling brave and ask your question. Alternatively, you can just put it in the chat and I'll try my best to address it that way. Once we're an hour in, so in around 50 minutes, we will have a quick break just to give you time to get up and stretch your legs, grab a drink, go to the toilet, and come back fresh and focused to pick up where we leave off. Just because 2 hours is a very long session, I want you guys to get the most out of it. So I'll let you know when that's coming up and put the time to be back inside of the chat as well, so you don't miss anything. Does anyone have any questions on any of this before we get going today? Okay, in which case oh, yep, was that a question?
No questions.
Okay, great. So we can move in just to how the ELT is marked. Like I said, some of you, if you attended the previous session, this is a repeat and you may already know this. Essentially, every skill that you're tested on, so reading, listening, speaking, writing, we already had a session on writing. This is the reading session. You'll be given a mark out of 13. So the scale is 0 to 12. So there are actually 13 different bands. Obviously, to get the highest marks, you want to be aiming inside of this 10, 11, 12 banding. You can see what this actually is the equivalent of for an IELTS and CEFR below. So this is just a good, I don't know if you want to take a screenshot, or like I say, I can share the slides with you guys afterwards. It's really useful to know what your equivalent is, because whilst this is definitely an exam that's looked upon favorably, knowing your IELTS equivalent especially is really useful if you're putting this on, for instance, a university application or applying for a job, and thinking about the IELTS equivalent scores. You definitely want to be aiming for 8 and above. I mean, 7 and above is also fine, but for these C bandings, we don't want to be sitting in the A's and the B's. We definitely want to be aiming for the C's here, so C1, and if we can, C2, looking at those 11 and 12 scores. So in terms of achieving the higher bands, that's what we're speaking about today. How can you maximize your chances of success in the performance for the reading section? John will be able to share with you the session link for when we covered how to succeed at the writing section of the ELT. We've already done that. So this session is just on reading. If you do have any questions about the other stuff that's kind of like really pressing, you can put it in the chat and I'll try my best to answer it in the Q&A at the end. But for today, we'll be focusing mostly on the reading section itself. So with that done, let's move into some kind of key points for the reading section. The reading section is a 40-minute assignment. You won't get anything longer than 40 minutes, so timekeeping is going to be really important, mostly because there are quite a lot of questions for you to answer in that time. So it can range anything from 28 to 32. This is just using the 3 past papers on the Digital Institute online, where you're able to access some past papers for revision. All of those papers, so the 3 they have listed there, do range between 28 to 32 questions, and you can see with 40 minutes to actually answer the paper for reading, you're quite tight on time. Okay, so managing your time and knowing when it's time to move on from a question is going to be a really important skill. We'll go over how to know when it's right to move on and when to skip a question if you're really stuck. We'll go over that a little bit later. You'll be looking at, over the course of this, often 2 passages. This does vary. I have seen this vary. So you will either have 2 shorter passages or 1 longer passage. Today we'll be looking at actually 1 longer passage, and it doesn't really matter either way, but there are definitely pros and cons of both. Obviously, you can't pick which one you're going to get, but don't be thrown if you open the paper and you do see that there are 2 shorter passages, or that there's a long one. That's both are kind of expected formats, so just be aware of that. All that will mean is that for the 1 passage you will have maybe more complex questions, or a few more questions on that passage than you otherwise would, but most of the time for each passage you'll be answering around 12 to 14 questions. I have seen it go maybe 15 for some papers, but nothing really more than that. You want to, obviously, if there are 2 passages, split your time up entirely equally. So you want to spend 20 minutes on each, just to ensure that you're giving yourself the best possible chance of completing the paper itself, because like I said, it is a little bit tight on time compared to some of the other sections. So in terms of the types of the questions that you will face, there are a range. Okay, so there are lots of different questions that the reading section includes. They all differ in the skills that they're testing. So what are they trying to identify? And also in the way that you ought to approach them. So we have multiple choice questions, so that's MCQ up here. Another really, probably one of the more difficult question styles that you'll find in the reading section is true, false, not given. Sometimes you'll get a fill in the blanks kind of question. There aren't any of these in the past paper that we'll be looking at today, but there are some in some of the other past papers. So if we get time, we can hunt one of those out just to make sure we cover that off for you guys. These are not the most difficult questions, but they don't come up very often. So a lot of the time candidates are a little more unfamiliar with what those kinds of questions are looking at. You also have vocabulary questions. These are very frequent, and a lot of the time you'll have maybe 2 to 3 or even 4 vocabulary questions in one test. So this is a big part of the reading section, practicing your synonyms and paraphrasing in order to identify the right answer on a vocabulary question can often win you a really easy 3 or 4 points. So it's definitely something to focus on when you're coming onto your revision. Then we also have your more bog standard comprehension style questions. These are checking that you've understood the general gist of the text and you can unpack what the author's opinions are on in certain paragraphs and in relation to certain facts or statements. And then the final style of question, if we kind of have to break it down into this 6-fold split of question styles, is what we call an inference question. And these are asking you to infer either a general theme or a sentiment from a paragraph on the whole. Often it will be looking at a short paragraph and asking you to select a sentence that most accurately describes the paragraph on the whole. And like I say, this is a bit of a unique style of question, sort of similar to the true, false, not given. It can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're not very confident from a reading perspective, because it's testing not only your comprehension, but your critical thinking skills as well. So these are the 6 styles of questions that you will encounter inside of the reading section. All of the questions, it's worth saying, are actually multiple choice, kind of formally, like you have a selection for each question you're asked. You're able to pick from one of 4 options. So we'll go through again, how do you, if you're stuck, how do you use the fact that it's multiple choice to the best of your advantage, and sort of go through a process of elimination to pick the most likely possible answer, so that you aren't simply guessing or having to give up on questions straight away. Does anyone have any questions just quickly before we get started on any of these questions? If not, what we'll do now is we'll actually dive into the specifics of each of these and go through a couple of examples. Okay, I'm going to take the silence as being indicative of no questions. Of course, if you do have a question, feel free to just pop it in the chat. Okay.
No question, no question. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gabri.